All right, so I'm good to go whenever you're ready. All right, so for those of you watching, thank you for tuning in. This is DivineProspect Kingdom Marvelous Ministries. I got my brother here, JR Redmond, in the building. This brother's asking me questions, but he got all the notes in his notepad already. You know what I'm saying? Me and him are going to have a build over the next couple of days. He came into town so we can chop it up about the scriptures and so forth. Very good brother, very authentic. We had a great build earlier when we went out to eat and everything like that. So he has a couple of questions, and I figured I'll do a live stream because there may be other people that have similar questions and may not have the opportunity to come out and sit down and actually chop it up or build about. So me and him are going to discuss a couple of things. And I think the first thing that he wanted to go over is the virgin birth. Now, before we begin, for those of you who are watching, if you're watching right now, hit 1 and let me know if the audio and video is cool. I can't tell. I'm looking here, showing me that it might have a little connection issues, I guess, because the signal's not that great. Matter of fact, you know what I can do? I can switch it over to my phone, and we can deal with it that way. Hold on. Okay. Okay. So you're hitting 1, everything's good. Let me see. So Azariel, I could touch on that, but I'm on J.R. Redmond's time, so I want to address his questions. When we do our live this Friday, if you have that question, let me know and I'll address it for you. All right. All right, y'all saying it's good, but yeah, let me still switch over just in case it gives, because I get great signal here. So I'm just gonna use my phone connection. Do you have the plug for your phone? Not that one, for the Samsung one.
Yes.
Or this one.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right. Let's see if this shows up. All right, appreciate it. Is your tablet battery good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's good. It's at 95%.
That's good. You must have been charging it while you was out, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. You could probably even, is it charging? Make sure it's charging.
Yeah.
Okay. Solid. Okay.
All right. So let's see where this connection is at. Why is it not showing up? Get wise. You said you thought this was an old video. Nah, this is not a premiere. We are live right now in Buckhead in Atlanta. So this is definitely not a pre-recording. All right, there we go. Let's connect to it. Load up. All right. So I just switched over to my phone connection. So hit 1. Let me know if the connection is good. Hit 1. Let me know if the connection is good. All right. So we're going to get started. So we first was talking about Isaiah chapter 7:14 because we wanted to deal with Matthew chapter 1. Right.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and get to Matthew chapter 1. And you had laid out some premises already on the basis of why what we're reading here sounds like an anomaly, sounds like it's kind of off, right? So when we go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 18 to verse 25, I'll go ahead and read it because we pointed something out in verse 23 that we link back to Isaiah chapter 7:14, right? So it says, now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins, right? Context, save his people from their sins. That's important. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord has spoken by the prophet. Now, verse 23 says, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. Verse 24 says, when Joseph woke from his sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. All right. So now you go to Isaiah chapter 7:14. And also for those of you watching, you can follow along in BibleHub.com or BlueLetterBible.org, which are free Bible study tools online. But if you're part of the Patreon, you should have access to the Accordance Bible software or the Logos Bible software, right? And I just hooked my brother up with the Logos Bible software so you can do more in-depth studies after we finish our build this week, all right? So you can go ahead and read that there.
Okay, start at 14.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel.
Mm-hmm.
Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good.
Mm-hmm.
Before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be the land.
The land, go ahead.
That thou abhorrest
Mm-hmm.
shall be forsaken of both her kings.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria.
All right, stop there. So the key thing, it says, for before the boy knows to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted, meaning that the Israelites will be taken out of the land, right? And it will be in a state where it needs to be repaired, meaning that the Israelites will have to come back at some point in time, rebuild and everything like that. So apparently within the context of what we're reading here, this is referring to something during the time of who? Go to verse 10. Read verse 10.
Moreover, the Lord spake again to Ahaz, saying.
So who?
Ahaz.
Ahaz, the king of Israel. Go ahead.
Ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God. Ask it either in the depth or in the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. And he said, hear ye now, O house of David. Is it a small thing for you to worry men? But will ye worry my God also? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign.
So stop there. So the Most High asked Ahaz, ask for a sign, right? So I can prove to you that what's going to happen. Well, when we go up a little further, again, we get in all the details.
What was the sign for?
There was a sign. So go to verse 1.
The sign was for, and it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it.
All right, go to verse 2.
And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim. And his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind.
All right, now watch verse 3. Go ahead.
Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, go forth now to meet Ahaz, thou and Shub, thy son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field.
And say to him what?
And say unto him, take heed and be quiet. Fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for the two tails of these smoking fire bands, for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and of the son of Remaliah. because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have taken evil counsel against thee, saying, let us go up against Judah and vex it. Let us make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabil. Thus saith the Lord God.
All right, you can stop here at verse 7 after you read it,
Oh, thus saith the Lord God, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass.
Slow down. So now the king Ahaz is hearing all these things, this confederacy that's being conspired against him, and that they're trying to conquer the land in which he's king over. And he's trying to find a way to receive confidence that he's going to be able to beat this confederation, right? And then the confederation, what they had whispered or what they had said amongst themselves, the Most High revealed it to Ahaz. But then he goes to say in verse 7, thus says the Most High power, it shall not stand and it shall not come to pass. So this has to do with a particular situation. And when we go down, the sign that what the Most High is saying is true, because Ahab is a little shaky. He says, all right, I'm going to give you a sign. And that is what you read in verse 14. Right? 14 to 17, right? So if we go back to Matthew, there are some things that people tend to do to kind of play around with this. Number one, they'll say, well, don't you believe in dual prophecy, right? Ambiguous prophecy that, hey, this could be prophesied here, but it can also mean this too. And I'll say to them, if you want to subscribe to that, that's fine. However, in the context, we're not talking about something that's going to happen in the later future. We're going to have something in the near future, in the lifetime of Ahaz, to give him proof that he will win the battle on behalf of the Most High, right? That's what that context is talking about. But when we go here in Matthew chapter 1, and we go to verse 22, it says, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. Now, what we established earlier is that this is the only time that we see Emmanuel mentioned here. Jesus, as far as I can tell, and I've read almost, I think, the entire Synoptic Gospels in the book of John, I don't see him being called, hey, Emmanuel, let's go follow Emmanuel. That's not there from my analysis, right? If you go into a lexicon, which is the dictionary of the original language, whether it's Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, in this case it would be Greek if it's the New Testament, the word Emmanuel is there, and it shows you only one entry. That's here in verse 23. It doesn't show up nowhere else, right? And it's actually a transliteration of the word Emmanuel in Hebrew that we find in the Septuagint. So the Septuagint transliterates a Hebrew copy into Greek. And if we see this word Emmanuel here, and we go back to the Septuagint, Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, to see what that word is, it's the same exact word because it's a transliteration of it, right? And what you'll see is from the Greek renderings of the New Testament, a lot of it quotes what we call the Septuagint. However, it does borrow some elements from the Targum. Are you familiar with the Targum?
No.
All right. So the Targum, real briefly, is an Aramaic paraphrasing of the Hebrew text. Okay. Yeah. So what had happened was the Israelites went into captivity by means of Babylon, and they were speaking Hebrew before they went in there. When they went into captivity, they was there for 70 years. You had almost 2 generations born. That's like an immigrant coming here speaking whatever their native language is. By the time you get So by the time you get to the second, they're bilingual. By the time you get to the third, they already engrossed in American culture, speaking English, right? So this is what was going on here. So when they came back, the second and third generation are speaking Aramaic. The elders, the priests, and the scribes, they still speak some Hebrew, but they're not the majority of the people. They go back to rebuild the city, temple, and walls, which takes some time. And then they find the book of the law and start reading from the book of the law. But as they read it in Hebrew, you have hearers that are speaking Aramaic saying, well, they can make some of it out because it's a sister language, almost like Italian and Spanish, right? Somebody speaks Spanish, somebody's Italian, they kind of pick up on it, you know what I'm saying? But there's still some things you're not going to get because it's not the same language. Right. So they got some of the stuff, but then it said, and then they gave them the sense, meaning that they paraphrased it in a way so that they can get the gist of what the Hebrew is saying in the Aramaic language, right? So that's where that tradition comes from. So a lot of the New Testament borrows from some of the understandings that come within the Targums, which is the intermediate period between the closing of Malachi to the opening of Matthew or Matthew, right? You have the Targum tradition that persisted all the way up into the time of Jesus' day, right? So the word Emmanuel is there. It's only has one entry in the New Testament. And for those of you who want to go into this further, on your Blue Letter Bible there, click on 23. The number 23, yep, go to the interlinear. All right, so you got it down already. And then go to your entry for manual, and you'll see it's only one entry, right?
It's G16.
Yep, from the Strong's, right?
94.
Correct. So when you use the Blue Letter Bible, or when you use the BibleHub.com, these are providing you Bible studies resources. Most of these resources are in the public space, and it's there because there's no copyright or anything like that. So anybody can use, you can quote from it without signing it, etc. But it gives you the Strong's Concordance because a lot of people who are getting into the Bible, that's what they first introduced to. After a while, you'll tend to move away from the Strong's Concordance because it's really dated. Matter of fact, Strong's lived in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
So we're using something that's over 100 and something years old, right? And since then, more lexicons have come out because more manuscripts have been found, more archaeological excavation has been done. We found more inscriptions in the land of Israel. So our understanding of the language has increased since then, right? However, this gives you a good starting point for anybody just jumping into the text. Now, with the software that I gave you, what I'll show you probably tomorrow time is how to use other lexicons for your 2 or 3 witnesses. So you don't just have to hold the Strong's. What I typically do is if I find a word I'm not too sure, I'll go and look at 2 other lexicons and try to get the consensus, right? What is the sense of what's being conveyed from 3 different sources who are showing mastery in the language and trying to show you what the context and usage of that particular word is, right? In the case of Emmanuel, it is only used in one place, and that is Matthew 1:23, which is very unique because he's not called that anywhere else in the book of Matthew. It's not mentioned nowhere in Luke. It's not mentioned in none of Paul's epistles, not mentioned in none of the general epistles. Where's this coming from? So there's different answers that are given for it from Christian apologists, right? Because they swear that this is the word of God, that this has been revealed, right? That if they're using it here, it could be a double prophecy, that even though it spoke during the time of Ahaz, it also can have another implication in the future if it's written in the text and the text is inspired by God, because they always go to the scripture where Christ says, "Lo, I come in the volume of the books." So therefore, they'll be able to say, hey, we can pick this and use this to speak about Christ.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
So if it's a double prophecy, right? I guess the question I would have is if it could be considered a double prophecy. The question I would have is, doesn't it have to happen the same way?
You would think so.
I mean, for it to be a prophecy, like for instance, if I say, okay, you're gonna leave this place and on your way home, there's gonna be an accident on a freeway and you're gonna have to drive 10 miles per hour all the way home. You get on a freeway and it's an accident, but you able to drive the regular speed limit. Did that prophecy come true?
Not really.
Not
really,
at
all, right? Yeah, only a portion of it, correct.
So my question would be, is if it's a double prophecy, then that means during the time of Isaiah, Isaiah's children would have had to have been born immaculate.
Correct.
If it's a double prophecy.
If that's what it's saying.
If that's what it's saying.
Correct.
Or during the time of Christ, he would have had to be born the same way Isaiah conceived his children.
Correct.
In order for it to be a double prophecy, it has to repeat somewhere.
Correct.
Is that correct or incorrect?
It should, right? However, this concept of double prophecy is saying that if something is quoted in the New Testament, what it's saying is what is the way it's being applied in the Old Testament can relate to a concrete event that's going on, but it's giving hints of what will happen in the future. This is the argument that they make to substantiate what we're reading right now in Matthew chapter 1. Now, I'm going to tell you my position, right? So my position is the earliest followers that we just mentioned, right, of Yeshua, Jesus, and his disciples were his own people. And we see that started in Acts chapter 2. So when Peter was speaking, right, because the Spirit came upon him and he spoke in one tongue, it was understood in various different languages. It says at the end of that, then was added to the ecclesia, the called out ones, a couple of thousand of people was added, right? But it was from their own people who came there for Shavuot. Because when Yeshua was killed, it was around the time of Passover, unleavened bread. And 49 days later, you get Shavuot. So the reason why Yeshua was telling them, hey, stay in Jerusalem until the Spirit comes down is because Passover and unleavened bread was already passed. And the next time these gathering of the Jews come back is during Shavuot, because the law says your men are to appear before me three times out of the year. That is Passover, unleavened bread, That is Shavuot, and that's Tabernacles. They have to come back to Jerusalem. So knowing that they'll come back to Jerusalem, these are going to be the same conspirators that follow the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes to put Yeshua to death. And they're going to come back here to hear this word about what happened about 49, 50 days later. This is why the scripture says that Yeshua stayed with them for about 40 days. He was killing time. Then after that, he said, go to Jerusalem, stay there, and then the Spirit will come down on you. So what happens is all the Jews came back that was scattered. They came back to keep Passover and keep Shavuot. And now they're hearing this message from Peter about somebody that they conspired to kill 49, 50 days later, right? So this is how we know that the beginning of the ecclesia, the called out ones, were Israelites. They were most of them from Judah, but in this case, scattered. That was coming back. So they're hearing the word, they're being added, and they're becoming part of the body of Yeshua in that movement, right? So the key thing is, these are the early followers. This goes all the way up into Acts chapter 10, when we have Cornelius is there. And Cornelius seems to be something other than an Israelite. And the reason why we know that is because, I'll show it to you real quick. Go to Acts chapter 10. I want to show you something real quick.
Acts 10.
Yep, Acts 10. And we're going to go to verse, let me pull it up. All right.
Devout man.
No. So we're going to go to, you go to verse 28.
Verse 28.
Mhm.
Okay. Read it.
Yep.
Okay. And he said unto them, ye know how that it is unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation. But God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean.
Now click on 28. And that word he's using there for another nation is what? See if that comes up for you.
It is G246, which means foreign.
There you go. Allophilo. It's the only place in the entire New Testament that this word is used. That is called hapax legomena. It's a fancy Latin word, that Latin Greek word that they use to mean it's the only place in which a word is used, which means it calls to attention. If there's all these different words that can be used to mention a foreigner, ethnos, you can use the word ethnos, you can use the word ethnos, Hellene, you can use several other words. Why is Peter using this particular word? Because he is identified emphatically that this is not an Israelite, whether you think it's a southern or northern tribe, this is somebody completely different that is of another nation or of another race. If you look at your Strong's, it says what? A foreigner of what? Another tribe or race. Where you at? Oh, scroll down. Let me see. Yeah, keep going up. I think it's just showing you the incidents. Okay, here. So the usage just says foreigner, and this says what? What does that one say?
It says one from another
nation outside of Israel. They're not Israelites. It comes from two words that are syntax: allos, which means other, and philos, which we get in like the taxidermic classification of animals and or plants, where phylum is one subcategory and certain features are in the same phylum of different animals, and then it breaks down further to that to subcategories, right? So in the what we call taxonomic or taxidermic setup, where you work in a classification of animals, at the phylum level is believed that now once things split from here, you have two totally different tribes or ethnicities of people. So he's referring to somebody that is not Israel in any sense of the word, not like other words like ethnos and Hellene that could mean a northern tribe Israelite or just a foreign altogether. This one has nothing to do with Israel, right? So why am I saying this? Because all the way up into chapter 10, they're only dealing with their own people.
Jews, right?
Correct. Their own people are following them. Their own people are pushing the movement forward. They're setting up an autonomous structure. Acts chapter 4. What happens is everybody who had something sold it, gave to the apostles. They distributed so everyone had a need. And this is the early, what we call church. If that's a bad word, it should be ecclesias. And what happens is today, you really find churches that sell everything and use what they have to make sure that the scripture says that everybody had all things in common. That means if you have a house and a car, I got a house and a car. You got wife and kids, I got wife and kids. If you got this, I got that. That's how it works. There's no envy. There's no jealousy. Why? Because you have what I have. So what it does is that it annuls that desire to want something other than what you have because you already have it, right? There's no lack, right? And that's why the scripture said they were able to grow and increase and so forth. So up until 10, now we have a situation where a vision is showed to Peter, unclean animals eat. He's like, no, I've never eaten nothing unclean. You know what I'm saying? What are you talking about? He said, eat, kill, and eat. He's like, no, I'm not going to do it. So he said, look, the reason why I'm showing this because anything that you call unclean, that the Most High can make clean. Now, people will look at that and say, well, what does this have to do with anything? Isaiah chapter 56, I'll get that to you 1 second. And again, this is going back to your 7:14, Isaiah 7:14. Go to Isaiah and go to 56.
Isaiah 56.
Yes.
Okay.
So what was going on in Isaiah 56, or just in Isaiah in general, the Israelites were going off, right? They were declining in regards to their morality, keeping the statutes, commandments, etc. So what they were also doing was driving a wedge between them and foreigners that was amongst them. The scripture says, do not oppress the foreigner who is amongst you. You shall love him as you love yourself, for you were once a stranger in Egypt. However, that loving of your neighbor is according to Torah, which means there are certain laws that apply to foreigners that don't apply to Israelites. An example of that, when the Jubilee year comes, Hebrew servants are let free. Foreigners, you don't go nowhere. You got to stay there unless whoever you're under lets you go. But it's not a law that you have to be released. If there's an animal killed in the street, it becomes carrion. That's the name that they call an animal that's found killed in the street. Israelites, you're not supposed to eat it, but you can give it to a foreigner. So the foreigner has some laws that seem like make them second-class citizens. However, they have made a covenant to join with the Most High. So they've abandoned their former ways or lifestyles that come into covenant with the Most High for whatever benefits they're doing it for. So when we read Isaiah chapter 56 and verse 3, what does that say?
It says, neither let the son of the stranger that joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, the Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree.
Now that word there in Hebrew is nakar, the root word ha-nakar, the foreigner. Go into it and see to confirm that that's what it says, right? Because anytime somebody teaches, you should always have tools and resources on deck to validate what they're saying. So a lot of times people will tell you something and never show you how to go back and check what they're saying, right? So when you go to that word nakar, you click on it, right?
Stranger.
Yep. What does it say?
It says Nekar, Nekar. It is H5236.
Now go to Exodus chapter 12, because we want to see if there's a consistency in the usage of that word. Because Exodus chapter 12 is now the Israelites are about to have Passover unleavened bread, but the Most High gives regulations in regards to who can and cannot eat of the Passover, right? And when you jump down to verse 43, you can go ahead and read that. And we're going to see if that same word is used there, so we can see if there's a consistency there.
Okay, it reads, and the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the Passover. This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof.
What is that word there?
That stranger is Pika.
Okay, that's one word. Keep going, because it's going to.
Keep reading. It says, but every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner.
Go ahead. A foreigner or hired worker may eat it. What's that word there for foreigner?
The word there for foreigner is Towshab. Towshab.
Okay, so now this word is where you get a word called teshub, which means to turn, right? One that is turned. This is what they translate as a sojourner. So there's different types of foreigners that we see. There's one that comes in there to maybe see somebody they know, do business, and they leave out, right? Or they leave out. There's one that comes there to work. So one comes in and do business, and we see more details of that in the book of Nehemiah, because he had to close the gates of the city because they were foreigners that was coming in doing business on the Sabbath.
With hands on
Yeah, so I'm gonna lay hands on you. So that's one. The second one is one that is hired to work in the city. So, they have to come in and work. But then there's another one that says, I want to live here. So one that's passing through the trade. Correct. One passing through the trade, one coming through to work, and one coming through because he just wants to live amongst Israel. So he's the one that makes the covenant with Israel. And there's regulations to this, right? So that's Toshab, right? Now, if you keep reading, go to the next verse. Well, actually, no. Let's skip down till we get, go to verse 48.
Okay. And when the stranger shall join with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised.
All right.
And then let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as one of that. And he shall be as one that is born in the land.
Ke Ezra, that's the word. Ke is the, kaf is the prefix that means like or as. And then you have your root word there, right? So one like a native. So he should be just like a native in the sense where if he's going to eat the Passover, he has to be what? Circumcised, right? Now look up that word there that we have. Yep. Look up that word that we have there, right?
Okay.
And you may even hear people with the name Ezra. So Ezra is literally a native, somebody that is a native someplace, right? That's their domicile.
This stranger, right?
Yeah. What's that stranger?
This stranger is Ger.
Ger, right? There you go.
G-E-R.
There you go. So that's another one. So now in this case, it says the Ger, right? Where ki yagur itcha Ger. When that type of stranger, if he wants to keep the Passover, he can be circumcised. But earlier we had a different word for stranger. We didn't hear Ger. It's another word for stranger. It says that one shall not eat of it. Go back to verse 43.
That was in the car, right?
Correct. So go back to verse 43. That one cannot eat of the Passover, right? And the reason why is because for their reason being why they're in the land, right? Why are they amongst you? What are they to do, right? So it's the word nakar. Now we're going to see something very interesting here. So read that. What does that say?
The stranger?
Yes, that stranger.
It is,
that's verse 43, right?
43, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. Keep going.
It should be Nekar.
Yeah.
So then Nekar. So obeying Nekar means son of the stranger, right? So in Hebrew, you have a construct form, and that just means of. So if I put the word son in its construct form, it means son of. If I put it in its plain form, it just means son, right? So it's Bain Nekar. So it says any son of a foreigner, lo, shall not eat of it, right? So the son of a foreigner, and again, it's really, it's good to just use the words the way it is in Hebrew, like nakar, gar, because you can understand it. But in English, it sounds like it's the same thing.
Word. So you really have to understand the context of it.
Exactly.
And that's why it's important to understand the culture.
Correct.
Because without the culture, you can't get the proper context. So it's just like, I wrote something and I said she was the baddest woman in the whole land.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they're gonna someone 100 years from now, if they don't understand the culture that we came up in, they're gonna say, "Wow, she was wicked. She was evil."
Yeah, but you're saying she's the baddest one in the land, and I wanted to marry her.
Right? Meaning she was a beauty.
Yeah, I went to go rap to her, try to bag her, and he's like, "Wait, hold up, she's bad. Why are you doing this?" Yeah. So
you gotta understand that. The cultural context, you could be completely lost.
Exactly. So understanding that these different types of foreigners, you have some that came in to do business, some that came in to work, and there's some that came to be a native. This is why the one that is the native is the one that is living amongst Israel. And when we go to Deuteronomy chapter 29, they also come into covenant with the Most High, meaning that they are agreeing to keep these statutes, laws, and commandments in order for them to remain in the land with Israel, right? So when we go back to Isaiah 56, what started to happen was the Israelites would look at this and say, wait, Nakar, they say in their mind, okay, well, this person is not supposed to be eating with us, you know what I'm saying, in regards to the Passover. So maybe they shouldn't even have the same, what's the best word, the benefits that we get, you know what I'm saying? So they started to drive a wedge between themselves and any foreigners amongst them. So the foreigners who wanted to join the Most High, you had to do so by cleaving unto Israel, living amongst Israel, keeping the statutes of the Lord's commandments. They felt estranged in the land. So now in Isaiah 56, the Most High is speaking to these people who the Israelites are making estranged and saying to them, wait, if you want to join with me, don't let nobody say A, B, and C about you. So go back to Isaiah 56 real quick. All right, go back to verse 3.
Neither let the son of the stranger that have joined himself to the Lord.
Go back to that. Click on 3. You said, neither shall the son of a stranger, Vain Nakar, right? That should be similar to what we read in Exodus 12, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Nakar. All right. And now I'm going to read this for you while you're there. Exodus 22:21 says, do not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Israel. Exodus 23:9, do not oppress a foreign resident, since you yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. Leviticus 19:33, when a foreigner resides in your land, you must not oppress him. Right? 19:34, you must treat the foreigner living among you as a native born and love him as yourself, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am the Most High, your power. Now, all of these things is telling you how to deal with that foreigner. And what's the word there for foreigner here? Let's look it up. Let me go into the Hebrew of it and see what we got there. The word wegir. And now wegir is the one that can what? Eat in the Passover. So if he's the one that's a resident amongst you eating the Passover, you can't oppress him. You can't mistreat him. You can't defraud him. You can't do him wicked.
Treat him like a brother.
You got to treat him like a brother. That doesn't mean he's a kin brother to you. And again, according to those statutes of commandments, there's still some differences between you and him. But your heart towards him cannot be one of oppression, taking advantage of him, etc. Because this is what the Israelites will do when they're not keeping the law. They're going to start treating people the way they was treated, like Stockholm syndrome.
Right.
Same thing happened in slavery. There was free blacks that got their freedom. There was this Christian program that said, hey, do y'all want to go back to Africa? They're like, yeah, let's go back to Africa. They chose Liberia, sent them over there to Africa. They lived amongst Africans, and they treated the Africans like they were their slaves. Because what happened was their mind was so damaged, they didn't understand the culture, the language, mannerisms, none of that. They were acting like their Western counterparts and using that same mindset to oppress their own people that was still there. Some of them were sourced from these same towns. Their ancestors go back to these same towns that they were sourced from, and then they was mistreating them. So that's what happens when you don't have that cultural orientation to understand, like, wait a second, let me kind of cleanse myself of this Western way of mind of living, and then go and learn the culture that I've been disconnected with. And then once I'm able to do that, now it can be more sensitive, more tender, and more loving towards those individuals who look like me, as opposed to acting like my oppressors, right? So this is kind of the same sense now in the past on how the Most High wants us to deal with these strangers, right? So where you at? You're still in Isaiah 6? All right. Yeah. So Isaiah 6, I'm going to finish this up, and we're going to go back to Isaiah 7:14, right? So Isaiah 56, what verse are you at right now?
3.
All right, so keep reading.
Okay. Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, the Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree.
Now jump down to verse 6.
Also, the sons of the stranger that joined themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love him.
And what else?
And to love the name of the Lord.
There you go. What else?
To be his servants.
And what else?
Everyone that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it.
And what else?
Taketh a hold of my covenant.
Keep going. Read verse 7.
Even them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar. For mine house shall be called a house of prayer for all people.
Okay. So the key thing here is that there are in our community people that say that anybody that's not an Israelite is doomed for destruction, right? And then you got some people that say anytime something's mentioned in the Bible about a foreigner, it's referring to the northern tribe, right? There's a lot of issues with it. The first one is dealing with that word in Acts chapter 10. I've never gotten a straight answer to that for people that's saying that it's only talking about Israel. Because every word you ask them, hey, what are different words that's used, ethnos, Hindi, that could refer to Israel. I said, what about this word? Never heard of it in their life. They go back and research it and say, oh, okay, well, I guess that's different. You know what I'm saying? It is. But here, where it's talking about he's going to bring them to the mountain, there's going to be a future prophecy in which the law is going to go back out from Mount Zion, right? Mm-hmm. And the foreigners are going to hear about it and want to go on more about the Most High, right? So what he's saying here at this point, the foreigners that now have joined themselves, who serve the Most High, who love his name, who keep the Sabbaths, he's saying, don't let anybody say to you that you cannot come to the Most High. Last scripture on this, Deuteronomy chapter 29. All right, let me get Deuteronomy chapter 29. My bad, I'm pulling up like 3 different scriptures to jump into once we're done. Deuteronomy chapter 29, and then you're going to go to verse 10.
Ye stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your captains of your tribes, your elders, and your officers, with all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, and thy stranger that is in thy camp.
Now slow down. It says, read that again. This is important, right? Because there's another thing that's missing there, because it says your wives. There's some people that I guess that they feel that women can't covenant with the Most High, and it can only happen through the man, right? So if a woman is single, that she can't covenant with the Most High, then she'll be utterly just rejected, which is not true, because if there's, let's say, for example, a woman is a widow, or she no longer has a husband, she's single. And the Most High has preferential treatment towards the poor, the widows, the fatherless, etc. Right? But read that over again, and we're going to see there's something very interesting saying there about the foreigners.
It says, we can start at 10 again?
Yeah.
Okay, it says, ye stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God.
All of you. Now, who was these all of you?
All of the Israelites.
Okay. Now, yeah, keep going and see what else it's talking about.
Your captains, your tribes, your elders, your officers, with all the men of Israel. Your little ones, your wives, thy stranger that is in thy camp.
And what are they doing in the camp?
If they in a camp, they join the Israel.
Yeah, but what are they doing? Keep reading. It's going to tell you what
from the hewer of the wood unto the drawer of thy water.
So it sounds like their servants. There you go. Keep going.
That thou shouldest enter into a covenant with the Lord thy God, and into his oath, which the Lord thy God maketh with thee this day.
Verse 13.
That he may establish thee today for a people unto himself, and that he may be unto thee a God, as he hath said unto thee, and as he hath sworn unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Neither with you only do I make this covenant and this oath, but with him that standeth here with us this day before the Lord our God, and also with him that is not here with us this day.
So future, meaning us, right? So the key thing here says your children and wives. So besides the men of Israel, your children and wives and foreigners. Now, what's that word for foreigner there in verse 11?
It is the sojourner.
So now you're seeing consistency, right, on who they're referring to. The one who has made it his business to live in your household amongst you, your servant, he's considered the ger type of stranger. So that means he can also join himself to the Most High. We read in Isaiah 56 based on Deuteronomy chapter 29, which includes him into that covenant, right? But this is what the strangers were doing amongst Israel. They were serving them. Now people look at that and say, that's weird. Oh, you're talking about when the kingdom is here, Gentiles are being saved to serve Israel. I mean, if you look at future prophecy, that's what it's saying. It's saying that, but the difference is,
it says handmaids and servants.
But the difference is this: people think, oh, when somebody's a servant, a slave, it's the same way chattel slavery was done here in America. This was done according to Torah. When these slave masters was beating you and all of that, Torah says if you beat a man like that, he loses tooth, one eye, you gotta let him go. But you think they was doing that? What was the law in the book saying?
Oh, no, not at all. Oh, no.
And then it says what we just read, do not oppress the stranger that's amongst you. We was oppressed a lot. So therefore, the way that Israel is going to treat the foreigners in the future is a mirror of what the ideal of how Israel was supposed to treat the foreigner when the law was sovereign in the land and they had to follow the law. Right? All right, so this is just something that was a side
It's
note.
not gonna be. It's gonna be in righteousness.
That's what I'm saying.
It's not gonna be the way that they treated us.
Exactly. So they're gonna gladly serve us because their thing is go to Micah chapter 4, because they want to do what we see in Micah chapter 4 in the future, verse 1 to 2.
But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it.
All right, so it says people shall flow to it, right? Now go look up that word for peoples so we can see what this means. In Hebrew, there's a common word for people, and let's see if that's what it says there. So like we get the word Ammon,
nation
has to do with nations and peoples, right? So not just one particular nation, because there's words for that, but it's referring to just a myriad of different people. Plethora. What's it say? Plethora. Plethora. I always mess that word up. Plethora of different people. So go back and read verse 2.
And many nations shall come.
And many what?
Nations.
Nations.
Plethora.
Okay, the word goyim. That means different types. All right, keep going.
And many nations shall come and say, come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.
And go read verse 3. And this is how we know that this is not being fulfilled now. Some people say the state of Israel today is fulfillment of prophecy. But let's read verse 3. What does that say? There you go. What does it say?
And he shall judge among many people and rebuke strong nations afar off. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up the sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore.
That's
interesting.
That's
what
I'm about to say right
all
now.
Around there, they war right now.
But now this is showing that the foreigners who were initially warring with Israel are going to have a revelation that the Most High is establishing himself in Mount Zion, and the word of the Most High is coming forth from there, and they're going to go there to learn the law. So they're going to beat their swords that they used to use for war into something to use to serve. Now they're going to work the earth and the ground in that area of Jerusalem where Mount Zion is at, right? So the Gentiles have a role to play. So there's a we talking about doctrines, right? It's a doctrine in our community that says that all the Gentiles are most likely going to destroy them, and we're going to put them in chattel slavery in the kingdom. Then there's some people that are on that's one extreme, right? Then there's the conservative. Then you have the liberal part that says, no, they're going to be just like us. We're all going to be the same in the kingdom, right? Okay. Then the moderate, which I take, is it's a mixture of both. Number one, they can get saved and cleave and come into New Jerusalem, go up to the mountain, but they got to serve in the process because this is a way that the Most High is vindicating Israel against all the oppression that they face at the hands of multitudes of people. Right. And he's gonna reveal his name through Israel to show that I'm gonna interfere or intervene, and I'm gonna bring you back to the land. I'm gonna lift you up. I'm gonna make my name great through you. And as a result, the peoples are gonna serve you because you face oppression all this time. Now they're gonna serve you. But again, like you said, in righteousness according to Torah, right? So let's get back to Matthew chapter 1, right? So in Matthew chapter 1, one thing to note is that there was what they call Jewish Christians, or there were Yehudim or Israelites, or what they call Jews, who kept the law and followed the Messiah. There were several groups. One of them is called the Way, and we find that in the book of Acts, where they was trying to equate Paul with the Way. The other one is the Ebionites, and Ebon is a derivative of the word meaning poor, and they were called the poor ones. And then the other one was the Nazarenes. Those are the three major sects: the Way, the Ebionites, and the Nazarenes, right? The information that we have about these individuals mostly come from their opponents, which are the early church fathers, right? Where they have preserved traditions about them, or they may have encountered them, right? They had what's called a Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. Sometimes they call it the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Sometimes it's the Gospel of Matthew, whatever. They had a version of the Hebrew Gospel only. They didn't have Mark, Luke, John. They didn't have nothing else. They only had Matthew. Because when you read Matthew, you see a lot of Aramaisms in Matthew because it wasn't originally written in Greek or to Greek people. It's written to Israelites. And if it was written in Greek originally to Israelites, it was Israelites that their second culture or language was Greek, but their primary culture was Hebrew. Because a lot of things that's in Matthew, you won't understand unless you're an actual Hebrew, right? Mm-hmm. So when we read this gospel, their gospel starts at chapter 1, verse 1, and ends at 18. Read verse 18. What's verse 18 in Matthew chapter 1? What does that say?
It says, now the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise.
I'm sorry, go to 17. Verse 17 it ends. 18 is where it's missing.
It says, and so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David into the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations. Mm-hmm. And from the carrying away into Babylon until Christ are 14 generations.
It stops there. That's where it stops. Their Hebrew gospel stops right there. That means the rest of that narrative is not in their Hebrew gospel. So you don't have no prophecy of Isaiah 7 and 14 again, which is different because we don't see it anywhere else.
18. Okay.
We're talking about Isaiah, right?
So we're talking about Isaiah. No, I guess I was saying, I misunderstood what you were saying right now. But I understand. So you're saying that right here. So this Matthew 18.
So Matthew 18.
It wasn't there.
Now, I'm going to say this, right? And I like to be careful and considerate when I say this. Mm-hmm. I'm saying those groups that I told you about, mm-hmm. that's the version of Matthew they had. And they were ethnically Israelites who followed Yeshua. And then after he passed, they followed Peter, James, and all of them. And that is the version of Matthew that they had.
So the Hebrew version of Matthew stops at 17.
According to what they present. Correct. And that was quoted by their opponents, who spoke about these groups, and it said this is what they had.
And that would be the Way, the Ebionites, and the Nazarenes.
Correct. Now, let me show you something interesting. Jerome, he is known for his translation of the Vulgate. I said Jerome and a half. Watch your math. So Jerome, he was responsible for translating Hebrew and Greek into Latin, right? He was... he knew multiple languages, right? So he said something very interesting about this version of Matthew and other versions of Matthew. He says this in Lives of Illustrious Men, chapter 3. Now, if you're interested in finding the primary for this, I can send you a book that has all the church fathers writings, including his. You can read the entire thing in context, right? But we're just going to take a quote of it. And anybody that's watching, if you want a quick source to this, there's a website called HebrewGospel.com. HebrewGospel.com. And you can pull this from that source. Or if you're interested in reading the entire, there's volumes and volumes of books on the church fathers, but just Jerome by himself, you can email me at kingdomharbinger@gmail.com or join our Patreon. We have a book there that gives you the entire thing. And that book I think it's over 13,000 pages. It's a huge book, but it has every work, right? But he says, this is what he said. This is Jerome now. Jerome is the father of translating the Hebrew and Greek into the Vulgate. And he says something very interesting. He says, Matthew, also called Levi or Levi, apostle and a 4 times publican. In the past, he was a publican tax collector. Composed a gospel of Christ, at first published in Judea in Hebrew for the sake of those of the circumcision who believed. But this was afterwards translated into Greek, though by what author, it's uncertain. This is what he's saying.
So Jerome, that's responsible for doing translation, correct?
Correct.
Don't know who translated Matthew out of Hebrew into Greek.
He says nobody knows.
And this is what we're seeing right here.
That's what, and I'm going to keep reading.
The Greek version.
Correct.
In regards to what's below 17.
Correct. Now, another thing, the interesting thing is verse 16, right? But hold off on that. Let me read this real quick, and then I'm gonna jump into that. So it goes on to say, the Hebrew itself has been preserved until the present day. Now, he writing this in 393 AD. He's saying at least by 393 AD that there was a Hebrew version that he's saying is the one that was written by Matthew. It's preserved unto this day, he said, at the library of Caesarea, which Pamphilus so diligently gathered. I have also had the opportunity of having the volume described to me by the Nazarenes of Beroea, a city of Syria, who use it. In this, it is to be noted that wherever the evangelist, whether on his own account or in person of our Lord the Savior, quotes the testimony of Old Testament, he does not follow the authority of the translators of the Septuagint, but the Hebrew. Now, remember I said that earlier. A lot of times when you read this in the Greek and they're quoting something, it goes back to the Septuagint. However, he's saying, no, that's not the case, because their version that they had, it quotes the Hebrew Old Testament, which means that word that we see there for virgin, look it up in the Greek, because we touched on this a little bit earlier.
In Matthew?
Yeah, Matthew chapter 1 and verse 23. That quotation there that's used for virgin, right?
Right. It says...
No, just click on 23. Find the word for virgin there. The Greek word. And you had mentioned this earlier.
They put the wrong word in the Septuagint.
Right there.
Parthenios, yeah.
And that means a woman who has not known a man, right? However, if I was quoting this and I had the Hebrew version of Matthew, now it's debated whether it's Hebrew. They really believe it's Aramaic because that was the lingua franca of their time in their area. Nonetheless, if I was looking up these words and I wanted to quote something from the Old Testament and I wanted to mean virgin, I wouldn't simply just use Alma. Alma is too general. It just means a young maiden. Doesn't make a distinction whether or not she's known a man or not. In the context of Isaiah, she's already known a man. Right?
She already had a son in chapter 3 when he told him to go grab Shir Shushub, or excuse me.
Yeah.
Your name.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that was his son.
So the key thing is, so she knew a man and she gave birth. So they would not use the same word we see in Devarim or Deuteronomy, where it talks about a woman who is an actual virgin and about her coming together with the man. And if she gets married and the man lies with her and he finds something in her indecency or whatever, he doesn't want to deal with her, but he makes an ego accusation against her. The parents will go get the tokens of the sheets that they lay down. So when the hymen is broken, blood is there, and that's used as evidence. That's referring to an actual virgin, a Betula, right? But in this case, if I meant a virgin, meaning that this is a virgin birth story, I wouldn't use Alma. I would be more specific, and I would quote maybe something else that has Betula there.
Right.
But whoever was responsible for this translation thought it was interesting to carry a tradition.
Either he didn't know Hebrew,
or he had a tradition that came from somewhere that they added to the Greek translation. Now, I'm just dealing with Matthew because the only place we see that is in Matthew, right? So that's when you start to see little anomalies and say, wait, this is interesting. Now, he goes on to say, he says, wherefore those two forms exist out of Egypt have I called my son, and for he shall be called a Nazarene. This is stuff that he's saying, that he's actually quoting, that they're looking at it based on, these are the Nazarene groups, that Yeshua will come out of Nazareth and he would be a Nazarene, right? So he goes on further and starts quoting more and more, but I'm going to go to Jerome. He makes a commentary in 398 AD on Matthew chapter 12 and 13, and he says, in the gospel which the Nazarenes and Ebionites use, which I have lately translated into Greek from the Hebrew, and which is called by many or most people the original of Matthew, this man who had the withered hand is described as a mason who prays for help in such words as this. I was a mason seeking a livelihood with my hands. I pray thee, Jesus, to restore me mine health, that I may not beg meanly for my food. Go to Matthew chapter 12, verse 13. What he's pretty much showing you is he's showing you a contrast between what is in this quote-unquote Hebrew version of Matthew and what is in this Greek version of Matthew. And he also translated a version of the Hebrew into the Greek. This is his testimony, right? Now, what does that say?
This is Matthew 12, 13.
Okay, what does it say?
Then saith he unto the man, stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole, like as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Okay, now stop there.
So what they're saying is they're showing you that, hey, in this Greek version, it says that, but in the Hebrew version, it identifies that man as a mason. As a mason, you use your hands to build stuff. If your hand is withered, you can't work as a mason, you can't feed yourself. This is why he's there begging. Right. So what he's showing you is that from the gospel that the Nazarenes and the Ebionites have, when you go to at least that verse, there's a huge difference. than what we read in here, and that's what's there, which goes back to the case that in the book of Matthew, when there's end off at 17, there's nothing else there. It picks up at Matthew chapter 3. Go to Matthew chapter 3, verse 1. This is not just from Jerome, just using him for the sake of time, but I'm using him as an example to see when we go back and look over the book of Matthew, it must be reconstructed and restored based on what they had at that time. Can that process be done? Yes. Can it be done 100%? No, because we don't have all of it. But we see not only from the church fathers quotations of the Hebrew version of Matthew, but we also have scribal notes in manuscripts of the Greek that say on the side, in the margin, but in the Hebrew gospel it says this, but in the Hebrew gospel it says that. So we have data from there, quotations from the church fathers, and we have other works such as the Syriac book of the Gospels. It's called the Old Syriac Sinaiticus because it was found in Sinai Desert by two sisters, and they translated it from the Syriac into the English. And while they were translating it, they found something interesting about verse 16, which we're going to get in 1 second. Now, where do I have you at right now?
You have me at
now read that.
3?
3 and 1.
3 and 1, it says, in those days came John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness of Judea.
That's it. So it stops at 17 and then it picks up here. There's no virgin birth story. There's no baby in the manger. You know what I'm saying? There's no 3 wise men. Theirs stops at 17 and then it picks up over at chapter 3, verse 1. Now, this is what they were carrying. Now, this is not just a testimony of Jerome. Origen as well, he knew Hebrew. Jerome knew Hebrew. Epiphanes knew Hebrew. These are all church fathers that knew Hebrew. All of them did not know Hebrew, but a few of them did, and the ones that did were able to read this, and they saw these differences. Now, that's huge, because they're saying the ones that these guys have is the original. But what we have today, the Greek translation, we don't know who translated that. So it might have been some agenda that came into adding this stuff. I'm not saying that definitively. I'm just saying based on the testimonies that we see in here, this is what's being alluded to, right? But let's go to, what was I going to take you at? Matthew chapter 1, verse 16. And I'm going to try to pull up here. I should have it here. My OSS. All right, hold on 1 second. Shoot. Didn't mean to do that. Oh, okay. Well, I'll just put. I have a PowerPoint of the lecture that I did. Let me see. It should be in here. Like, I think I might have left that at home, but I'm gonna read it for you because I have it here. All right. Oh, so you know what? Let me read for you this so you can see this. So Epiphanius, he was a church father, and he critiqued that Hebrew version of Matthew. And this is what he says, right? He says in his heresy, his book on heresy, he says in chapter 30, he says, but these people having something else in mind, this is what he says, listen, they falsified the genealogical tables in Matthew and start its opening, as I said with the words, it came to pass in the days of Herod, king of Judea, and the priesthood of Caiaphas, that a certain man, John, came baptizing with the baptism of repentance in the river Jordan, and so on. That's what you just read. So he's saying they falsify the genealogical tables, meaning that they have the genealogy, and we're going to show you where he says they falsify, where that's at. And then he says they start at Matthew chapter 3, verse 1. There's nothing else there in that version of Matthew that they have. And he's referring to the Nazarenes that Jerome later on talks about as well, right? He says about the Nazarenes, they have the gospel according to Matthew quite complete in Hebrew, for this gospel is certainly still preserved among them as it was first written in Hebrew letters. This is Epiphanes saying this. This is the church father notating that that was originally not in Greek. Now, we didn't write this. However, in the consensus in academia today was that it was written in Greek. And what they do is when they go back to the church fathers saying this stuff, they say, well, they was mistaken. And they wasn't sure what they were saying. You got to check out great how deep this goes. And then he goes on to say, in the gospel that is in general use among the Ebionites, which is called according to Matthew, which, however, is not whole and complete, but forged and mutilated, is what he says. They call it the Hebrew gospel. It is reported. He says, but their gospel begins. It came to pass in the days of Herod, king of Judah, the high priest of Caiaphas, that a certain man, John, came, baptizing, etc., etc. This is what they're saying. Now, what is the falsification of the genealogical table? Read Matthew chapter 1, verse 16.
And Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ.
Now stop there. We're going to find out there's a nuance there that differs between the Syriac, or what's called the Old Syriac Sinaiticus, and what's in the Greek. The Old Syriac Sinaiticus is believed to have preserved some of the elements of this Hebrew version of Matthew, and we're going to see that in 1 second. However, stichometry of Nicephorus, I always mess this guy's name up. He's also a church father, and he wrote something called the Anti-Legomena of the New Testament, meaning that things that go against the actual orthodoxy of the text, right? He says the Apocalypse of John, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Epistle of Barnabas. These are books that he's saying should not be part of the canon, right? Things are outside the canon. Then he says, and gospel according to the Hebrews, which is the gospel version of Matthew or something like it. He said there's 2,200 lines less than a canonical version of Matthew in Greek. So if we take away Matthew chapter 1, verse 18, all the way to Matthew chapter 3, verse 1, you can see how many lines is missing there. It lines up almost point for point. And there's a couple of other lines that are missing elsewhere, but the majority of it comes when you take away
For that all have
wait,
sinned.
hold on 1 second.
11.
Wait, they said there was no sound. When did the sound go out? Hold on, y'all. I'm glad I looked at the screen. What was the last thing y'all heard? This should be sound now. Damn, we just went over all of that.
They didn't know that?
At some point, they stopped hearing the sound. I don't know where. Somebody said 5 minutes ago. All right, so somebody says 5, somebody says 6 minutes ago. What was the last thing you heard? I'm just going to summarize it so we can move forward. What was the last thing y'all heard? My bad. I didn't even realize that. All right, so I'll pick up from here. So pretty much what we were talking about was the church fathers were making references to the Gospel of Matthew. And then they were giving you from their experience, like Jerome, he said that the Nazarenes had a version of the Gospel of Matthew that Matthew wrote, that they had it until his day, 393 AD, and that the Greek translation, we don't know who authored, right? Interesting. Then he goes on to say that the Ebionites and Nazarenes have differences with their Hebrew Matthew to what's in the Greek. And we went to Matthew chapter 12, verse 23, where the man with the withered hand was actually a mason. And as a mason, you need your hands to build stuff, and his hands was withered, so he couldn't work and take care of himself. So he asked to Yeshua to heal his hand, right? Then we go into the other church fathers that I was reading, and the other church fathers also confirmed. Let me pull that up real quick, summarize it. The other church fathers also confirmed that, here it is right here. Let me get into Matthew. Oh, and I want to show you the footnote in Matthew chapter 1, verse 16. It's a footnote that the translator made to show that they identified a huge difference between the Greek version and the Syriac version that they're reading. So here, we're going to go to Epiphanius, right? And he says the Nazarenes, they have the gospel according to Matthew quite complete in Hebrew, but this gospel is certainly still preserved among them as it was first written in Hebrew letters. This is his testimony. He says, in the gospel that is in general used amongst the Ebionites, and that's added there for context, which is called according to Matthew, which, however, is not whole and complete, but forged and mutilated. They call it the Hebrew Matthew, it is reported. So he's saying the one that the Nazarenes have is whole and complete. The one that the Ebionites have seem to be forged and mutilated. That's what he's saying, right? Even though Jerome says that the version that the Nazarenes have and the version that the Ebionites have seem to be one and the same, right? And it goes on to say here in verse, in the rest of his book, he says, but these people have something else in mind. He's talking about the Ebionites. They falsify the genealogical tables in Matthew and started opening, as I said with the words, and we read it. It came to pass in the days of Herod, king of Judea, in the high priesthood of Caiaphas, that a certain man, John by name, came baptizing with the baptism of repentance in the river Jordan, and so on. So remember, the genealogical table stops at verse 16. You have 17, that's about the generations unto Yeshua, but then everything from 18 to Matthew 3, verse 1 is not in this version of Matthew that these church fathers are contending with, right? And then when we go to stichometry of Nicephorus, he goes on and says that the gospel, according to Hebrews, 2,200 lines, which is 300 lines less than a canonical version of Hebrew, that there's a difference between the one that the Ebionites, Nazarenes had and what is the Greek version that he had during his time, right? So we see the majority of those missing lines come from Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to Matthew chapter 3 and verse 1. Anything in between that 18 to the last verse in Matthew chapter 2 is not in their book of Matthew. Why? Because it's not important. There's no virgin birth. They don't subscribe to the virgin birth. They don't believe in it. So the church fathers thought they mutilated the text by taking it out because they don't want to subscribe to the virgin birth, because Ebionites did not subscribe to the virgin birth. Neither did the Nazarenes. The Nazarenes did not start subscribing to the virgin birth until after the 4th century, when Christianity was co-opted by the Roman Empire. And then now we start to see these people in what we call modern day Syria, or Antioch, wherever in that region, they started to adopt now various creeds that was coming out of the ecumenical councils during that time. There was 2 major ones before we have the end of the 4th century CE. One of them had to be the affirmation of who Jesus was. That's why you had the Council of Nicaea. You know what I'm saying? So they started to affirm that he was born of a virgin. This is why when we go to the Peshitta, which is probably the most well-known Syriac version of the New Testament, it validates this Matthew version in the Greek. However, the Old Syriac Sinaiticus Palimpsest, which is contemporary during the time of the Nicene Council, that one does not read the same way. It reads much different than the Peshitta, which doesn't come on until the 5th century CE. They read differently. One is the Syriac trying to match the Greek. One doesn't care what the Greek says, but preserves an original form that goes back to the Hebrew version of Matthew, which supports the begetting of Jesus to Joseph and not to Mary or Miriam, right? And what I want to show you is, I want to show you this note. And we read it, and again, I think they might have missed it, but you read it when I showed it to you here, and it says what again?
It says, Nathan,
Yeah.
Nathan begat Jacob, Jacob begat Joseph, Joseph, to whom was betrothed Mary the Virgin, begat Jesus.
There you go. It doesn't say Mary of whom Jesus was born. No. It stops there by saying who he was betrothed to, and then picks up to say that he begat Jesus. And that is in alignment with the rest of the genealogy, because all the genealogy is a man begetting another man. Now, some people who subscribe to the virgin birth will say, well, the reason why Jesus is not coming directly from Joseph is because they believe in original sin. And I'm going to summarize that again. What we talking about the original sin was that Augustine was responsible for making that doctrine popular, because he was trying to find a way to justify paedo baptism. Why do babies need to be baptized, right? If a baby is born, right, into the world, they're not a sinner. What did the baby do?
He don't know the law yet.
He don't know anything. But when the baby grows up, he learns the ways of the world, which is corrupt. So he becomes corrupted by what he's learning in the world, not by him just virtually being born. However, Augustine makes the point in Original Sin that when two parents get together, they have an inordinate passion towards one another. And it's through that babies are birthed. And he attributes this to one of the curses of Adam and Eve multiplying, that initially they never had to have desires to come together. But after they was kicked out the garden, now in order for them to reproduce, they have to lust towards one another in order to bring forth a child. And therefore, the child is begot through sin. So therefore, the child is a sinner. Therefore, he needs to be baptized in order for him to be brought into the body of Christ. This was his doctrine. And again, that's fallacious. You don't need that doctrine in order for you to support Jesus being born and other things like that. And that's when you brought out Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. And I said, read verse 12 for context. So just so you know, I just caught you up for that amount of time that y'all missed. Hopefully that works right there. Is the sound working now? Somebody says, okay. So you go to verse 12, but what you were saying was in verse 13. And they try to use this to support the original sin doctrine, and they try to use Psalm chapter 51, verse 5 to support the original sin doctrine, but none of these things are mentioning the original sin at all.
Matthew, what chapter?
Not Matthew, Romans chapter 5, verse 12.
Romans 5, 12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed on all men, for that all have sinned. Yeah, but the funny thing about this,
now look, it says death passed upon all men, for all men, not all people. All men have sinned. You're right, because when that baby gets older, they're in a fallen world. They're going to do something that is against the law. They're going to break the law in some way, shape, or form. Therefore, they're going to suffer death, right? So when the Most High spoke to Adam, he said, in the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. In the Hebrew, it's interesting. The word mut is there. And mut is an adverb that describes the verb. So an adverb is something that describes the verb. If I want to say you was playing football, right? So if you're running and I want to describe how you was running, I said J.R. Redmond was running fast, which means it would tell us, okay, he was really running fast. Or I could say he was running slow, and that way he got caught, or whatever the case may be. The adverb describes your verb, right? In that case, the adverb is what's called the infinitive absolute, which means it's an ongoing process. That means the way that you're going to die is dying continuously. It's almost like putting the S after a verb, like the word run. I say he runs. When did it start with him? We don't know. It's just a continuous action. That's describing the way that they will die. And that day, he says that you eat it, You shall mut temut. You shall dying die. That's literally what it says. It's a process of death. So a lot of people think, man, they didn't die that day. What happened? No. It's a process of death that they're experiencing until they're no longer here. And we see that because in chapter 5, it goes through how many years Adam lived and then he died.
Right.
But then when you pick it up in the book of Peter, it says 1 day is as 1,000 years to the Lord. Because he was telling them, don't think that the Most High is slack from returning,
right?
Because the way you calculate time is not the way he calculates. Right. Exactly. So when he says that process of dying, it then became a doctrine during that time that they believed that mankind lived up to 1,000 years until right before the flood, when the Most High said, my spirit will not contend with men no more than 120 years. And then from there, people started to die. After Noah and his son, everybody died within 120 years.
Is there something in the scripture that shows that exact thing? I think it's with a tree, though, where he says, the tree is gonna die, and he's looking at the tree like the tree ain't dead. Then a day or two later, or the next time he sees the tree is dead.
With his up, because he's speaking about it, but presently,
but it was a process.
There you go. And he's also likening it to a tree not having fruit. It's dead.
Right.
If you're not producing fruit, you might as well not even be here because you're dead, right? So, especially if it's a fruit tree, because that's its purpose. That's how it reproduces. Because if it doesn't produce fruit, there's no seed. No purpose. And if there's no seed, that tree is gone. So in Matthew chapter 5, verse 12, you read it, right? You read verse 13.
Matthew 5, verse 12 and 13.
And then I'm gonna go back to Matthew chapter 1, and I'm gonna wrap it up, and then tomorrow pick another topic and we can go through it.
Okay, cool. Right. So start at 12, correct?
Yes.
It says, rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they, the prophets, which were before you. Ye are
No, I'm sorry. Romans chapter 5, verse 12, 13. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
This is the one we talking about the imputation of sin, right?
Right.
Okay. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. I keep saying Matthew because we talking about Matthew. So
okay, so start at 12?
Yes, 12 for context.
All right, it says, wherefore by one man sin entered into the world.
Slow down. Who's that?
Adam.
Adam. Okay, keep going.
And death by sin.
And death by sin. Sin is an action. It's a verb. You got to do it.
In order for
how does a baby do sin?
He don't know the law. He can't do sin.
How can you do sin? The baby can't do. What are you doing? Crying? Oh man, you crying too loud. That baby is sinning. Right. Come on, let's be real. Okay, keep going. And then this is how they justify it. But when babies get older, aren't babies selfish? Yes, because that is part of their nature, how to survive. The law of survival indicates that self-preservation is the way that you survive. So a baby has to be selfish in its early stages to learn how to survive.
Right.
Not because it's being wicked or sinful.
Right.
It's innate. That's how they're physiologically hardwired.
Well, I mean, actually, you have to think about it. It makes sense, because if they weren't, then when you gave them something, they wouldn't continue. So if you gave them food, if you gave them the bottle, they would throw it away.
Yeah.
It would be no reason but that mechanism that your body is calling out for things, and you just automatically do it because you're wired that way to do it.
There you go. Right? That's it. Just like this, and the baby learns that from breast milk, right? Because I home birthed my last 3 kids, and one of the things that the midwife tells you is that after the baby's born, you want to hold the baby for warmth, but then before they leave, they got to make sure the baby's going to latch, make sure the baby's suckling from the mother's breast, because if they don't, that could be problematic. Yeah. But that's how they first learn how to survive.
You gotta get a pump.
Exactly, right? Yeah. But in this case, we did it naturally. So we didn't have to use a pump or nothing like that, right? Because my wife was able to lactate. But the key thing is the baby instinctively knows to look for. When you put the baby on the mother's chest, he automatically looks for it. Right. Then over time, when the baby, and you had a daughter, right? So when they're young, they always grab something and put it in their mouth. Yeah. When you give this, when they take it from you and try to eat it, that's instinctive. Are they sinning? No. Some people say they sinning. There's papers and stuff written on it. That's how we know that babies are sinners, and that's why they need to be baptized. But that's crazy. Yeah, they crayons. They're wrong. You know you're not supposed to eat that. Well, the adult knows that. The baby doesn't know that.
It's not in the law. You can't eat crayons.
That's you know what I'm saying? So with that knowledge of understanding that, keep reading what you was reading, right?
Okay.
So all men have sinned. That's a verb. That's an action. You have to do it. You're not born with it. It's something that you do.
Correct.
Okay, keep going.
Right. It says, for until the law, sin was in the world. But sin is not imputed when there is no law.
So if no law exists, there's no sin. So if the baby is being born, how's he breaking the law if he doesn't know the law?
Right. See, the thing about it is, it has to be your free will, right?
There has to be some kind
you
of
have to actually know. Like you said, it has to be an action. So you have to actually know, okay, this is one way, but I'm going to do the complete opposite.
Exactly.
It's not a problem till you know both sides of it.
That's it.
Because now you're making a conscious decision.
And now here's the thing. In Deuteronomy, go to Deuteronomy chapter 6.
Deuteronomy chapter 6.
And we're going to go to verse, let me pull it up. Deuteronomy 6, and we're going to go to verse 6. Read verse 6.
All right. It's
6 to 9.
6 to 9? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was just thinking about, that's just like saying, it's almost like saying everybody gonna get a speeding ticket. You gonna get a speeding ticket before you even got your driver's permit, because eventually you're gonna speed.
Exactly, at some point.
Even though you haven't speeded yet, you don't even have a license yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You haven't even taken a driver's class yet, but you already got a life full of speed.
But you don't get the ticket until you speed. So prior to that, you don't have it. At some point, you're going to do it. But at that time that I'm telling you, since you don't have a license yet, you have not gotten the ticket. You have not broken the law. So therefore, it cannot apply to you until that time.
So that means there shouldn't be no tickets in my mailbox.
It shouldn't.
Before I take driver's test.
Exactly. So there's no charge against you, right? Okay. Unless we talk about Minority Report. Remember that movie, Minority Report?
Right.
Was it pre-crime?
Pre-crime, right. The pre-cops.
That's crazy, yeah. All right, so keep going.
All right, from 6 to
9.
All right, it says, and these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart.
Keep going.
And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children.
Wait. Why am I teaching it to the children? They automatically sin. They shouldn't know what's right and wrong because they come out sinners. I might as well just baptize them. That concept doesn't exist in Torah, right? But it says you got to teach these commands to your children. Why? So when they get to the point, like you said, to know right from wrong, they'll make the decision and they'll be based on that.
What you just said, too, is another reason why when I read Isaiah 45, is that it doesn't appear to be talking about Christ because Christ already knew right from wrong.
Exactly.
He had the Spirit on him from the beginning.
He did. And
so he would have never had to have been taught.
Now check it out.
Right from wrong.
The scripture says he learned obedience through suffering in the book of Hebrews, but it also said that he grew in wisdom and stature with both man and God. The same thing was said about Samuel. So he grew in wisdom and stature. How? Well, when you go to Matthew chapter 2, where he's found in the temple and he's teaching, and they're like in awe, like, whoa, how does he know all of this? Because it was already embedded in him, right? However, his ministry didn't start until after he was baptized. So whatever knowledge or understanding he had it. But after baptism, it said he learned obedience through suffering, and he grew in stature and wisdom with both man and God. In some places it says both stature and spirit or whatever with man and God, right? So then that's interesting. I throw that out there.
I got a question.
Okay, go ahead.
About Christ's baptism.
All right, cool.
My question is this. Christ is the only person without sin. Correct.
Yes.
So
according to what
we know,
correct.
According to what the text says, so there would be no need for him to be baptized for remission of sins.
Correct.
If he never sinned.
Correct.
So is the baptism of Christ the baptism in the priesthood?
It's a rite of passage, and we learned that from the Qumran community, the Yahad community at Qumran. They had what's called a mikvah in Hebrew, which means a immersion or a means of submerging somebody in something, right? So it typically would be like when the priest, before they can go into the temple, there would be a bronze basin. They have to take their clothes off, go in and submerge and come out. That's a mikvah. When the woman has her period is over, she has to have a mikvah. She has to go in and come out to show that she's been cleansed, right? So it's a rite of passage. And in the case of Jesus and John, couple little nuances. Number one, John's father was a what? A Levite. And the Levites were responsible for what? For keeping the law and the priesthood, right? So Jesus is from what tribe?
Judah.
On his father's side, right? because their parents believed to be cousins or whatever the case may be, or they believed the cousin, their parents believed to be sister and sister. But so now we have a Levite who was supposed to be in the temple. I don't know why he out in the wilderness doing what he's doing. He's supposed to be in the temple, but he's technically still a Levite, right? And then you have Yeshua, who's from Judah. Now through the baptism, we see a transition from Levi to Judah. Now that's something altogether. It's a whole nother mess altogether. But keep that in mind. There you go. The second thing is during the baptism, there's a witness. So the Most High says, here's my beloved son, who I am well pleased. He says that as a witness. It says the Spirit came like a dove, not that it was a dove, like a dove, and it means it gently entered onto him. The voice came out. John was there. So you have the Spirit, the Most High's voice, and John, 2 or 3 witnesses witnessing this go on, but the Most High is begetting him. How do we know that? Go to Psalm 110. There's a begetting process to become part of the sonship of the Most High, right?
Psalms 110, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we're going to see, I'm going to show you 2 things, right? Psalm 110, and we go to 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 8. So Psalm 110, let me bring it up here so I can follow. All right, Psalm 110, and we're going to jump down to, go to verse 3 and 4.
All right. Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power, in the beauties of holiness. From the womb of the morning, thou hast the dew of thy youth. The Lord hath sworn The Lord hath sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek.
So now we have a situation where the king that this is being talked about, because verse 1 is a controversial verse because Christians say this is referring to Jesus, right? But it's not. It says Yahweh says to Adoni. So the Most High says to a smaller master, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. This is something that the patron deity says to the king that's ruling on his behalf, right? So whoever the writer is not David. It says it's attributed as a psalm of David, but the writer of this is saying the Most High said to my smaller master that had Adoni, sit at my right hand until I make my enemies your footstool.
So basically, he's witnessing. If that makes he's
going on.
A witness what's going on. So
Correct.
David didn't actually, like you say, write this. Somebody else wrote it for him
David,
or about David. But in saying that, it's saying the Lord said unto my Lord.
Correct.
So that
sit down at my right hand. So the word there is Ladonai or Adoni. Adoni. It has the yod suffix, which means a smaller or my master, right? Literally what it says. So it's saying the Most High said to my master. Now what we have there prefix, it says a le David means more, meaning a psalm of David. But what's found is that in a lot of the Hebrew text of this, that part is not there. It is actually ascribed to somebody else that's writing this about David. And that becomes controversial. And the reason why people use this is because in the New Testament, it's also repeated, but it's based on how it was being used during that time. Initially, when it was written specifically about David and the Most High. However, by the time we get to the Second Temple Judaism, which the time that Jesus was up to until the temple was destroyed, there was a different understanding. A lot of the reimagination of how the scriptures apply happened when the Israelites came back out of captivity and put everything, reestablished everything. And the reason for that is because they recalled in their past how they were driven away to idolatry and other stuff. So they were trying to make stricter measures to ensure that people do not return back to those old ways that they could not keep. So this is when you start saying, I'm going to lay hands on people. We never see that in the Torah about laying hands on somebody. They break something, you just kill them. He said, I'm going to knuckle up with you until you realize, you know what I'm saying? Hands and feet, you know what I'm saying? So the reason why I'm showing you this because now David is from Judah, but he's being inducted into order of Melchizedek. Go to 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 8.
Too. That's why he could eat the showbread.
That's why he didn't die. He put the ephod on and everything. He's supposed to die. You can't do that. So go to 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 8.
2 Samuel 8, verse 8.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it home again back to the Matthew chapter 1, verse 16. Show you the footnote, and then I'm going to close out, right? So read that. What does that say?
It says, and from Betah, and from Berotai, cities of Hadadezer.
Yep, Hadadezer.
King David took exceeding much brass. When Toy King.
Oh wait, hold on. That's not the right verse. Hold on. My bad. Hold on, let me get it. Okay. All right, so that is 2 Samuel 8 and 18.
8 and 18. Okay. It says, and Benaiah,
there we go, yes,
the son of Jehoiada, was over both the Sherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief rulers.
Now, here's the problem with that, right? It says chief rulers in your translation. Go to the Hebrew and see what it says there. See what word that is.
Chief rulers?
Yeah.
It is the word priest.
Yeah.
Coin.
And the sons of David, Bene, David, Kohanim, Kohanim, Hayu. And the sons of David were priests. However, that becomes problematic. How the heck are they priests? Well, if David is inducted into a priesthood order, then obviously anybody from his loins would also be priests. However, they didn't have a function because the Levites are still in place. Now, when the Levites are sitting to the side, we have no temple.
Right.
Now you need a different priesthood to continue on until the reestablishment of Israel in the latter days, where the priest will be restored, as it says in the book of Isaiah. The law's going to come back from Zion, and everything's going to be back to the way it was when they were sovereign in the land using Torah. But everybody's going to be transformed differently. The Torah is going to be written on your heart and mind. It's going to move your heart of stone, give your heart of flesh. That's Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 19, Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 26 and on. And he's going to write the laws in your heart and mind. So now you don't have to go to somebody and say, what does this say? It'll already be in you. And with that, you can get back into covenant with the Most High, and then you will be replaced back into the land. It's a whole process, right? But David's sons are priests. Now go to Psalm chapter 2. And this is talking about the king of Israel, right? Psalm chapter 2. And this says, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Most High and his anointed. So let's go to Psalm chapter 2. That word anointed there is that word what?
That word anointed. Is Messiah.
There you go. So the king is considered the Messiah of Israel. He's the anointed, right? So it's anointed. Yes, let's keep going because he's given the oil.
Yeah, and he's given that position by God. He was voted in.
Exactly. And then the Most
High decide, like preachers do today, I'm just gonna be a preacher.
Exactly, right?
That's what I want to do, you know. Right.
So he is now being inducted as a son because he's considered a son. Go to verse 7.
And Psalms, right?
Yep. Psalm chapter 2, verse 7.
Okay. It says, I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee.
So now the king of Israel, very interesting, is considered the Mashiach. He's considered the son, and he's part of the priesthood. So all these, what we call the typology, types that we see that David has, we see now being conferred upon Yeshua or Jesus. He's also the son, beginning by the son. He's also considered the priest after the order of Melchizedek, according to the book of Hebrews, right? He's also the Mashiach, or the anointed one. And not just there. Go to Hebrews chapter 1.
Everything is a shadow of things.
Oh, yeah. Hebrews chapter 1.
Hebrews chapter 1.
Because before you can make a case for Yeshua being the Messiah, you have to show the archetypes that exist in the Tanakh. Because if he's from the line of David, you got to show how is that connected to a priesthood? How does that connect to him being the Mashiach? How does that connect to him being the son? And how does that connect to him being a God? Because the king of Israel was considered a God. We're going to see that. Go to Hebrews chapter 1. All right. And hold on, let me grab it here so I can follow you. Okay, Hebrews chapter 1. And go to read verse 1.
Okay.
1 and 2. And then we're going to jump down to verse 5.
All right. It says, God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the world.
Now, the key thing there is not the word cosmos, or cosmos is not used there. It's the word ion, which means an age. That's important. But we'll deal with that another time, right? Now, go to verse 5.
Is that age the rulership?
Yeah, or the Messianic age.
Messianic
the age in which he'll reign, like you said, yeah. From the time he came until his reappearance, right? Okay. All right, so read verse 5. For
unto which of the angels said he at any time,
what?
Thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee, and again I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me.
Now, when you go to Hebrews chapter 1, verse 5, what psalm correlates with that? Psalm chapter 2 and verse 7 that we read. This has to do with the beginning of a son. How do we get that? In Matthew, when Jesus is being baptized, the sky opens up and says, this is my beloved son, who I am well pleased. The Spirit is there, descends upon him. The sky opens, the Most High speaks to him, and John is there to bear witness. Remember, he said, I'm here to bear witness of the light. So he witnessed the beginning or the sonship process where the Most High, after he goes through a rite of passage, which is that baptism, now the Most High says, this is my son. He has to beget him as a son in order for him to be his anointed, in order for him to be positioned as a God or a power over whatever he puts under his feet, because that's what that means. And then in order for him to join the priesthood, which later on we see happens after he dies, where he's in the heavenly sanctuary and he's being the mediator between us and the Most High, like the high priest was between Israel and the Most High, and he's working in the heavenly realm. There's no earthly throne, so that throne of David has been brought up to the heavenly realm, where a descendant of David sits on it until the Most High then dispenses it back into the earth in the end times, right? So his followers in the New Testament believe that all of this contains or connects to Jesus, but they wasn't making this up out of thin air. These are all concepts that was already found in the Tanakh. So here it says, at what time did he ever say to the angels, you are my son? He didn't. Right. He only begets who? The king of Israel. Then he also begets Israel themselves. He says, Israel is my son, my firstborn. He also says, Ephraim is my son. He also says, David is his son. Then in Psalm 2, he says, the king is my son. But if it's an individual, it's referring to the king. Other than that, it refers to Israel as a collective nation, Ephraim as a tribe. But then David is an individual who's a king who's not considered the son. But let's keep going. Go to verse 8.
It says,
but of the son, he says,
Psalms 2, verse 8, right?
Yep.
Okay, it says, ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen.
No, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 8. Yeah, you go back to Hebrews.
Sorry. New Testament. Hebrews chapter 1.
Verse 8.
Verse 8. Okay. It says, but unto the Son he saith, thy throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the scepter of the righteousness is a scepter of thy kingdom.
Now, if you look at the correlating verse for that, it is Psalm chapter 45. Let's go to Psalm 45. And the thing is that I think the problem is when people fight for the virgin birth doctrine, they said that because of that, Jesus can do all these things. However, what they neglect to realize is that a lot of things they say of Jesus can also be said of David. He was inducted as a son. He was the Messiah, the Mashiach. He was inducted into the priesthood, where we read in Psalm 110. And he's also considered a God over Israel, which we're about to read in Psalm 45. Read Psalm 45 and go to verse 6. But before we go to 6, go to verse 1 so we can get context.
Okay. To the chief musician upon Shoshanimium, for the sons of Korah, Mashkil.
Yeah, Mashkil.
The song of loves. My heart is, what is that? Indenting? A good matter. I speak of the things which I have made touching the king.
Who?
The king.
That's who. It says, my heart overflows with a pleasing theme. I address my verses to the king. That's important. I did a lecture where I was showing the evolution of what the early Jews and later on the Christian converts or the Gentile converts, the development and evolution of how they identify Yeshua, Jesus. His disciples believed him to be the king that was going to take them under the out of the captivity of the Romans and fulfill all the prophecies of the Tanakh to go and destroy the Romans. But when he died, they're like, oh, wait a second. Hold on.
He didn't come to restore it, right?
Something happened. Why? And then when you go into the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have what's called the Melchizedek scroll, which explains that a priest has to come first to exonerate the children of light or the sons of light or the children of Israel before a physical king could come and reign. If you go into the oral traditions of the rabbis, they have what's called the two Messiah theory, right? Double Messiah theory. They believe the Messiah was coming that we see mentioned in the book of Zechariah that was going to die so that way he can find a way to exonerate or atone for the sins, almost like it's implying that he's atoning for the sins of Israel before the king can come and rule that is mentioned elsewhere in scripture that's going to come on the scene, the branch of David, etc. So we have in two extra biblical texts outside of the New Testament, oral tradition here that states that you need two messiahs, one that's going to atone spiritually as a priest, and then one that is going to come physically and fight. So when Yeshua died, their mindset was like, whoa, hold on. That's why in Acts chapter 1, when he came back to them, the first thing they asked him is, when are you going to restore the kingdom? Mm-hmm. In their mind, yo, you're supposed to be this guy to come in. He said, that's not for you to know. Be my witnesses in Jerusalem, handle that work first. And then from that time until I return, then you'll see the kingdom to come. So now they're trying to figure out who this guy was. But the earliest believers believed him to be the king from the lineage of David until they realized, wait a second, he died. But he did appear to reaffirm them that he is going to restore the kingdom, but just not at this time. So now their cleansing had to happen, and that comes through the regathering of Israel. There's a cleansing that has to happen so you can be prepared for the kingdom. That's why we was here. He taught kingdom etiquette. He taught them how to operate as if you're in the kingdom. So when the kingdom comes, you can easily transition into that. That's why he healed the sick, because in the kingdom, there's no sick. That's why he fed them abundantly, because in the kingdom is always going to be food, the banquet. Everything he was doing was a sample of the kingdom to come.
And that's why he always says the kingdom of heaven is like, he always gives an example as to how we should be living and how we should be doing things.
Thinking, approaching things, etc. So that's the key thing, right? So here's the last thing, and we're going to end off on this. Where are we at right now? Psalms 45?
Psalms 45.
Okay, so jump down to verse 6. Now remember who the writer of this is addressing this to, the King of Israel. Now, what does it say?
Thy throne, O God.
Whoa, keep going.
Is forever and ever.
Keep going.
The scepter of thy kingdom is a right scepter.
Keep going.
Thou lovest righteousness and hatest wickedness. Therefore, God, thy God.
Whoa. Therefore, God, your God. You know, people say that Jesus is the God, the Son, the second person in the Trinity.
Like said, Lord.
Said unto my Lord.
Said unto my Lord.
The Lord Yahweh said unto Adoni, La Adoni, which is to my master, A, B, and C, right? So the Most High, and then the King of Israel, who's the master, because under him is all of Israel. He's the intermediary between Israel and the Most High. So if he falls, all of Israel goes into sin, right? So that's what happened. When the king fell, everybody went into sin, all the way to the point Most High said, look, I had enough of it. Y'all out of here. You know what I'm saying? But look in here, this is written to the king. He's called God. Wait, what? The king is called God. Something's wrong with that, or no, nothing's wrong with that. They believed him to be God. It says, Kis Aka Elohim. This is what they're calling him. Olam Wa'ed Sebet Misor Sebet Malkutekha. Malku has to do with the kingdom, right? But going on to, and that's verse 6. Your throne, O God. But we keep reading it, it says, therefore, God, your God. What? So Jesus has a God. If so, then how is he God the Son, a second person in the Trinity of the Godhead, if he has a God? Then they'll say, no. That means Jesus is all fully man and fully God. So the fully man portion of him submitted to God the Father, and therefore that is a subordination through the flesh to the spirit. But the spirit, God the Son that was in Jesus, is actually fully God and co-equal, co-eternal to the God. This is what they teach. This is the doctrine. They have to teach it that way. It's called the hypostatic union, because if not, a lot of these things that's being said here is not going to make sense until you create some kind of construct that exists nowhere in the text to explain what you're reading in the text. And that's what the church fathers have done to develop their theology over time that we now find in Christianity today, right? But here, the king is called God. So now we have several things. The king is the son of Israel, son of God. The king, at least David and his sons, have been inducted to the priesthood of Melchizedek, and his son has been called priest. He's the Mashiach, or the Messiah, and he's a God. So all of these, this is a profile of, okay, the Messiah is coming after the loins of David. He has to match all of these different things in order for him to qualify to be the one that Israel is looking to come. However, the way that he came was different. Now, in the two Messiah theory from the oral tradition of the rabbis, they said if Israel was in righteousness when the Messiah comes, the Messiah was going to be a mighty man of war. But if they're in wickedness, he's going to be a lowly man riding on a donkey. That's in the oral tradition outside of the New Testament. And when Yeshua came, I'm going to send that to you. When Yeshua came, that's how he came. He came as a lowly man riding on a donkey going to Jerusalem. They put the palms down.
There wasn't much to look at. Huh?
Exactly. Because Israel was in wickedness. They was in sin. This is what he kept teaching them. They wasn't getting it until after he said, okay, when I go, I got to send you this comforter because you're not going to understand what's going on. And once you understand that, once you get in a righteous state, now you are prepped for rulership. But if you're in a wicked state, there's no kingship for you. There's no kingdom for you. There's no co-reigning for you. There's none of that for you, Israel. So let's end off in this last part, and I'm going to bounce, right? Go back to Matthew chapter 1, verse 16. And I'm going to sum it off in this. And again, you don't need the virgin birth in order to validate Yeshua as the Messiah, because we only have one incident in the book of Matthew about, no, is it Matthew or Luke, where Jesus is found in the temple teaching. I believe it's the book of Luke, right? Let's get it real quick.
Excuse me. Book of Luke?
Yep.
Okay, we're at.
All right, book of Luke. We're going to go to verse 2 and 41.
Okay. Okay, and it reads, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover.
Now, also, just for the record, after Mary had Jesus, she had to go and offer turtle doves, which is part of the law that after you have a child, you have to give turtle doves, right? Why? Because after you have a child, you're considered unclean, because a woman's bodily fluids have to empty out blood and everything like that. So she's considered unclean. If Jesus was born a virgin, then and he's, let's say, sinless, the way we look at being sinless, then there would be no need for her to give the regular sacrifice. She can say, hey, look, the angel came to me, and this is the Messiah of the world. I ain't got to give no turtle doves. She had to go do as it was her custom to give the turtle doves after she gave birth to Jesus. Why is she doing that if this is a totally separate situation and it's a virgin birth? Right? A man broke the womb the first time through the hymen and penetration, leaving seed, and now the second penetration comes the opposite way of the child coming out the womb, and that considers making the woman unclean, right? This is why the text says if a man and woman lie together and they copulate, that they have to wash, they're unclean until the evening, because bodily fluids have been exchanged that makes them unclean, and therefore they can't come before anything that's been set apart, right? So in this case, it says Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem when?
Every year.
Every year. So they kept the law.
At the feast of Passover.
Uh-huh.
And when he was 12 years old,
okay,
and went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast, after the law, and when he had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintances. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him.
What verse you at?
46 now.
Okay, jump to 48.
And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Excuse me. And when we read that again, and when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing.
Okay, go to verse 49.
And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my father's business?
Now, here's the interesting. What verse was that you wrote? You just read verse 49.
Verse 49.
Verse 50 says, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. I'll read verse 51. Look how funny this is.
And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them.
Now, slow down. Then he went down to Nazareth and with them and was obedient to them. Now, keep reading that.
But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart.
Now, read verse 52.
And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor
Whoa.
with God and man.
He increased in favor with God? That's very interesting. For God the Son to be in that flesh, how can he have grown in wisdom and stature and in favor with God? How is that possible if he's God the Son, which is in the Trinity, they believe God the Son is a separate and distinct person from God the Spirit and God the Father. He is co-equal and co-eternal to the Father. He was never begotten. He was always was, right? But he's only the Son in role, right? In regards to what they call the economic Trinity. The Trinity means all three persons are working in the earth to bring about redemption for mankind. The ontological Trinity is their relationship before the earth was here, right? Okay. And they said that some people state that the Trinity is necessary to prove that God loves. That's part of his nature because there's a son and a father. Therefore, there's a relationship of love there before anything was here. Now, I don't agree with none of that, but I'm just saying when that doctrine is put forth, it's designed to help support the virgin argument. But if you're going to stay and adhere to the Hebraic tradition, you don't need all of that to prove that Jesus is a God, to prove that he's anointed, to prove that he's a priest, and to prove that he is the son of God. All these things could be seen to be done with the king of Israel through David. This is why the mention of David keeps showing up in the book of Matthew, because it's connecting him through his lineage, his father, where automatically the sons of David are priests. That priest line through Melchizedek flows through his sons all the way to Yeshua, shown in the genealogy of Matthew. And therefore, he is already born a priest, but he doesn't perform the priest's work until he dies and he resurrects. Dies and resurrects, and he's in the heavenly realm, in the heavenly sanctuary, right? So the reason why I'm saying this is because you don't need the virgin birth in order to prove all the things that Jesus came to do, because he grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. And then as he grew, he had to get baptized so the witness from the Father could be there. Then he had to be tempted 40 years. 40 days. 40 years would have been crazy. 40 days. And then from there, he started his ministry by opening up saying, repent, for the kingdom is at hand, right? So the last thing is go back to Matthew chapter 1, verse 16. I want to show you this footnote by the translator of the old Syriac Sinaiticus Pamphlet, whereby they identify that the agent for the beginning of Jesus and the old Syriac Sinaiticus Pamphlet is Joseph and not Mary, as it is read in the Greek version, because Jerome says we don't know who translated the Greek, but we know Matthew wrote his in the original Hebrew, and that is possessed by the Nazarenes and the Ebionites. That's interesting because there's differences there, and he even quoted them in his day. So read that again, Matthew chapter 1, verse 16.
It says, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus Christ, who is called Christ. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David into the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations. And from the carrying away into Babylon into Christ are 14 generations.
Okay, now stop there. Now check it out here, right? So this is in the Syriac, right? This is called the Straggler text. This is the way it's written. And here I highlighted Yosef, and it shows that he begat Yeshua, who is called the Messiah, right? In Greek, you have what's called declensions of nouns that identify a noun's gender, their number, and if it's in the nominative, which means subject, accusative, which means it's an object. It means the thing that the action is being performed on. The subject is the thing that's performing the action. The dative means it's the indirect object that is being used to interact with the main object, and also it could be an vocative, right? In this case, in here, this is how I say when we parse down in the Greek, we see that it's Mary who would do the declension of the noun, who is the begetter of Yeshua, right? However, in the Syriac, we have similar functions in the Syriac. It puts that progenitor of Jesus as being Joseph, and he's the one that's actually begetting or bringing him forth, just like it lines up with the rest of the genealogy. They only mention Mary because now when you continue to read the rest of the story, she's included in that, right? And at some point in the text, we see Joseph just disappear altogether. Right. There's a whole reason for that, but that's neither here nor there. But here, I don't know if you can see it, if I can zoom in, if it'll let me zoom in. Not let me zoom in. But anyway, here the translators, and this is where the original one is at right here. And translators notice, hey, wait, this is totally different from the Greek because they say in here the begetting is tied to Joseph and not to Mary. And that's their thing is like, where did this come from? When you do the research, because this preserves an old Hebrew tradition that the Ebionites or the Nazarenes had, where the begetting came from Jesus and not Mary. And this is why they did not support the virgin birth. So it depends on what side of the fence that you want to go on. Do you want to go on the side of the fence of the original followers who were ethnically Jews following Jesus, James, Peter, and them? Or do you want to go with these converts that came in later? Where, remember, Paul never spoke about the virgin birth at all. Right. He didn't mention, if it's essential, he would have mentioned it. It would be in Mark. It would be in John. In the book of John, it's believed that verses 1 to verse 18, pull up John chapter 1 on here real quick, is a prologue, meaning that it is a preface before you get into the narrative. It's believed that John may have written it, maybe somebody wrote it for John, or the Johannine community that existed around John's teaching wrote that because they were trying to vie against Gnosticism, which was teaching that Jesus did not come in the flesh because sarx or flesh is evil and spirit is good. Therefore, Jesus, if he was righteous and he was perfect, he could have not come in the flesh. So the book of John is written as an apology or as a means of opposing the idea that Jesus didn't come in the flesh. Just when we read the book of John in his epistles, it says, how do we know that you have the Spirit of God? Anyone that professes that Jesus came in the flesh is the Spirit of God, because the Gnostics believe that Jesus did not come in the flesh. He was in a spirit type of body that seemed like it was flesh, but it really wasn't flesh. And therefore, this is why he was perfect and able to do things that he did. But John and his followers did not agree with that. But in John chapter 1, there is no virgin birth story. However, the text does say, Gehenomai Sarx, that the word, the Logos, transitioned into flesh. We don't see no virgin birth. However, we do see a baptism. And this is the concept that was believed, that the word of the Most High, which is part of the Most High and an extension of the Most High, came into the flesh, which was Jesus, and it happened at the baptism. Now, the opponents of this, the church fathers, they call that a heresy called adoptionism, which they say that Jesus was born of a virgin. This is what the patristic sources believe. However, these Ebionites Nazarenes believe that Jesus was not born of a virgin, but when he received the Spirit during baptism, that enabled him to continue on with his assignment in perfection. This is why the Pharisees and Sadducees had to test him, because if they found a fault, a flaw in him interpreting the law, then he is no longer perfect. He can't be the one that's going to give himself. Right. And that's why I said they inspected him. That's why I believe it was about 3.5 years, because when you get the lamb for Passover, you keep the lamb for 3.5 days before you kill the lamb for Passover. You get on the 10th day, it's slayed on the 14th day. Yeshua had to be tested for 3.5 days to see if there was any imperfections in his teachings and his way of life. They could find him being a hypocrite. They couldn't find none of that. Therefore, they had to lie on him when they made up a trial and have him killed, under the pretenses that he was a sorcerer and that he was a blasphemer. And we see that also in other versions of the Talmud, where it speaks about Yeshu and it says that he was a sorcerer and that he was a blasphemer, right? So they made up false accusations. But the point I'm trying to make is that you don't have to say that Jesus can be the Messiah, he can be God, he could be the Son, and he could be the Son, God, Messiah, and a priest, that you need a virgin birth to do that, when we saw that David himself had all of these various titles, and he was simply the king of Israel, who was begotten through a union between a man and a woman. Yeshua came in the same stead as him. David's sons were priests. Therefore, Yeshua by birth is a priest, but he didn't operate fully in that until he was in the heavenly realm. However, people say Jesus was able to forgive sins. How can a man forgive sins? Well, technically, the priest is also involved in the cleansing of your sins. How? Well, if you sin, you can tell the Most High to forgive you. Most High said, that's great and all, but I got an ordinance or statute. You got to you got to give me an animal, depending on the sin. The sins are required.
Whatever the ordinance was for it.
Correct. So he was able to pardon them because after he dies, he's in a heavenly sanctuary where he can work that thing out. He can't do it in the earth because he's not a Levite, but you can do it in the heavenly realm because of that sanctuary. The Levites only for the flesh here on the earth.
Right.
But after he says, okay, your sins have been forgiven, this has been pardoned, then he can go and work that as a mediator when he enters into the heavenly realm with the Most High. Then he works it out with the Most High. Then you can be forgiven. Because he's the closest one there as the mediator than even the priest in the earth is to the Most High. Now you have the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to have the Most High's glory on it. Therefore, Moses went in and convened with the Most High through that. Well, that stuff was taken when the destruction of the temple happened, right? So now, in order to have a mediator, the high priest can no longer go to a temple that's not there. There has to be some other format of having sins forgiven. So Yeshua gave you a down payment and said, when I get up there, I'm going to sell it for you. He handles his business in that sanctuary. Therefore, now whatever sins that was committed that you was pardoned of was already taken care of because he used his body as a sacrifice and then he completed the actions in the heavenly sanctuary. There's no need for a virgin birth. That's just my position. I'm not saying that my position is absolute and it's 100% true. Everything else is false. I'm saying based on the weight of the evidence historically, if we're going to look at the text and we're going to understand it from a Hebraic perspective, the archetypes are already there in the Tanakh that Jesus aligned with, and therefore you don't have to force a virgin birth in order to substantiate him being the Son of God. So,
I got one more question for you.
all right, and we'll close out.
Made under the law.
Get that. That's Galatians chapter 4.
Is it up here, right here, or?
Anyway, it's up to you. Galatians chapter 4, starting at verse 3. I want to make sure I'm not muted again because I know I was muted before.
Galatians chapter 4, verse 3. It says, all right. Even so, we, when we were children, were in a bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of the time was come,
okay, fullness of the time was come. Go ahead.
God sent forth his son, made of a woman.
Correct, born of a woman.
Made under the law.
Made under the law. Keep going.
To redeem them that were under the law.
That what? That
we might receive the adoption of sons.
Now read verse 6 and 7, and then I'll go ahead and give some exposition to that.
And because ye are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son. And then a son, then an heir.
That's interesting because Jesus or Yeshua taught a lesson to the disciples about the temple tax, right? And I'm going to show you this real quick. This is important, right? And that's where we get the word drachma for the temple tax. All right, so we're going to go to Matthew chapter 17, verse 24.
Matthew 17, verse 24. And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, doeth not your master pay tribute? He saith, yes. And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, what thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute?
Okay, now read that and keep going.
Of their own children?
Or from
or
others.
of strangers?
Now keep going. What did Peter say?
Peter said unto him, of strangers. Jesus said unto him, then are the children free?
The children exempt. Go ahead.
Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, and cast and hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take and give unto them for me and thee.
So I'm gonna read it again, right? And that's good. And it says, they asked him, Peter, about the temple tax, Did your master pay? He said yes. And Peter came to the house. Jesus was first to speak. What do you think, Simon? He asked, whom do kings of the earth collect duty and taxes, from their own children or from others? Because the children are free or exempt from taxation. Why? Because why would they have to pay a tribute to their father when they're the seed of their father? Those who are outside of the king's domain within the home or through the seed bloodline, they don't pay taxes because they're not subservient to the king in the same way that a foreigner would be, right? Or somebody outside of the household. Then it says, who pay taxes, right? From the kings of the earth. Do they children of others? Peter says for others. Then Yeshua says, then the children are exempt. Let me go back to
Making a child, you'll be dealing with seed.
correct.
So if it's saying something or conception or something being born made under the law, then it would have to be whatever's in the law that speaks about how a child comes about. It would have to align with that.
Correct. So somebody said the volume went out, I guess a few minutes ago. But pretty much what we were just talking about was Galatians chapter 4, and I was linking it with Matthew chapter 17, verse 24. And so the concept, because again, I don't know why this thing keeps stopping my mic, but the concept we were talking about real briefly was he brought up Galatians chapter 4 when he's talking about born to a woman born under the law. And I brought him back to Matthew chapter 17, where it talks about the temple tax, when the tax collectors came to Peter and said, does your master pay the temple tax? Peter said yes. And then when Peter went to the house, Jesus said, wait, hold on. Let me highlight you real quick. What do you think, Peter? He said, what do you mean? From who do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others? Then Peter says, for others. Then the children are exempt. Jesus said to him, but so that we may not cause an offense, go to the lake, throw out a line, take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. So what Jesus is saying is because two things. There's two kingdoms going on here. There's a physical kingdom and a spiritual kingdom. The physical kingdom, the children of Israel are not inheritors to, because they're subjugated unto another empire, the Roman Empire. Therefore, they have to pay taxes. However, in the kingdom that is to come, that they are being initiated at this point, they are exempt from any duties or taxation because they are inheritors of that kingdom. Yeah. So this is why he's breaking that down to them. So when we go to Galatians chapter 4, you see Paul in his theology is breaking something similar down that Jesus is speaking by saying that when the fullness of time has come, read that again, verse 3. Hopefully you can hear it again.
Even so, when we were children, we were in bondage under the elements of the world.
There you go. As children, we were in bondage under the elements of this world. Keep going.
But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his son, made of woman.
There you go.
Made under the law.
Now slow that down. Now in Genesis chapter 3, we're not going to go there because we're wrapping up. Zera'ah, when the Most High is speaking to the serpent and pronouncing upon him the curse, because by the way, the word curse is not used there with Adam. It's not used with Eve. It's only used for the serpent. You go back and read it. So Adam and Eve was not cursed. However, the earth was cursed.
Earth was cursed for Adam's sake.
And the earth was resisting him. Yes. It bore thorns and thistles because before it gave forth to him freely, now you're going to have to put up a fight in order for you to survive. You know what I'm saying? But it says there, Zera'ah. Now, Zera'ah means seed in Hebrew, but the ah suffix means feminine seed. So that's what it's saying. It's saying that the serpent seed and the woman's seed were both war. So that concept, Zera'ah, or the woman's seed, or coming forth from a woman, ties into what he's saying here. That's not implying a virgin birth or anything like that. But like you said, through the natural means in which men come through, not by some spirit figure, some spooky spirit figure, but through a woman, which every man has come through a woman, that what was going to happen? Born of a woman.
Made I'm of a woman made under the law.
Under the law, which is important because Jesus was still under the law when he was born. That's important, but why did he do that?
To redeem them that were under the law.
To redeem them that were under. Well, how are you under the law? If you're breaking the law, there are judgments.
Yeah.
And there are judgments. So he came to redeem you from those judgments, because if the Spirit is written on your heart, then the sins, now check it out, there's different types of sins. Mm-hmm. You hear in the church, all sin is created equal. No, that's not true.
Some of them die for.
Some of them, and that's the thing, the capital offenses, there is no way for you to change that unless the Most High intervenes, like with David. David committed adultery and conspired to murder. Those are punishable deaths. He didn't die, but his son died. The Most High spared him. So if the Most High intervenes, he can exonerate you from receiving a death penalty. The same way if you're on death row and you about to die, the governor can make that phone call and stop the process.
You know what it is too? Is that almost the same way too? Like because you've done something and that judgment's gonna go forth, right? But because he's our head, he can override that. Just like if our wife or if our woman says something and we're there and we're present, we can actually override that.
The vow, correct.
Or we can let that thing ride.
There you go. There you go.
But because we're the head. So that would be the same.
Just like the governor. The governor is the head of the executive branch of the state. If the state is putting you on death row to get the death penalty, he's the only one that could override that through a decree, because he is the one to execute the laws. And he can say, no, don't execute the law. Let him go. Exonerate him. So just the same way that now we have the same thing with the Most High and with Yeshua, that they're able to exonerate us through this means, right? So being come from under the law, where if you break the law, there are capital offenses and capital punishments. There are other laws, and we read all of that through the offerings in Leviticus chapter 1 to chapter 4. It tells you about the free will offering, which is a burnt offering, meaning that you're not required to give it, but you give it if you have extra and you want to be in a good standing with the Most High. You have the guilt offering, the sin offering, and then you have the free will offering, right? These are all different offerings. The two that are optional is the free will offering and the burnt offering. There's guilt and the sin offering. The guilt offering, create a sin that's ignorant of, you got to give an offering. If you commit a sin that's not punishable by death, that is wrong, then you got to give an offering based on what the law dictates, right? However, if me and you, let's say for example, we get into a fight, check it out, and I kill you, your family can come and try to kill me. However, I can go to the refuge cities, right? And I can get asylum, and I can say, no, look, you can't touch me now, I'm here, but I want a free trial before you try to kill me, because maybe something happened there that nobody knows about. They just know that I killed you and they just want to kill me. So therefore, the elders step in and say, okay, let's create a trial. And based on the trial, it will determine whether or not I should receive death or I could be exonerated from self-defense or whatever some other means, right? So that's the key thing to understand, that is that even though when you have a situation where the law is laid out as that, there are certain things that if you commit that should be punishable by death, there even are some exceptions depending upon the circumstances of the event. Self-defense. What if you're trying to kill me and I just killed you defending myself, right? I got to have a chance in court to actually say that, and they got to cross-examine me and so forth. So in the same way, he's redeeming us from under the penalties of the law, the things that cannot be enforced no more because Israel is not sovereign. See, that's the thing. The reason why he had to come do this is because Israel is not in their sovereign capacity to carry out the judgments. Therefore, that land is perpetually in the state of wickedness and uncleanness. So he's given us an exoneration for the sins that we're supposed to be put to death for in the land by giving us that spirit that removes us from under the law, that requires us to go through the process of the law, because at some point the law can no longer be sovereignly executed in the land the way the Most High intends. So therefore, we have a contingency plan that preserves us until everything is restored, because by the time it's restored, Yeshua is our down payment, that when we get to that point, we already have the spirit. Once we transition, everything that's in the law is going to be written on our heart and our mind. Now we can come back into covenant with Yah. And once you can do that, now you're eligible to be restored back into the land where the law will reign. We read Micah chapter 4. And then now everything will be carried out, the penalties, because the text says in the book of Zechariah, last chapter, about the Feast of Tabernacles, whoever doesn't keep it will witness or receive the punishment of the plagues of Egypt. So people will still be rebelling at that time. However, those of us who have been translated into the kingdom in advance before the kingdom is actually revealed, we have a down payment that once we get in, we're going to get back into covenant We're going to be in a state where we will no longer know sin. However, the nations will still be trying, but they'll be punished for it. And then now we are exempt from the penalties of the law. We're no longer under the law. We're in alignment with the law, because now we don't need somebody to teach us the law. Like Deuteronomy chapter 6 says that we need to learn as a child. It'll be written in our heart and our mind, and it will be instinctive. There will be no will in us to oppose Yah, because his testimony, his covenant, and that relationship is going to be internal. This is why we can't keep the present law, because at some point the Most High knows Israel's either going to do the wrong thing and be exiled the land, or even in their exile, I can't punish them the way the law says you should be punished. Your community is supposed to stone you to death, either outside or excommunicate you. That can't be done without sovereignty in the land.
Put the evil away from amongst us.
There you go. Right. So at the end of the day, just kind of sum up everything, I think it's a reach, and this has been going on Christianity a long time. This is why they call people like me heretics, because I say there's no need for a virgin birth. If you want to look at the text, the New Testament, Hebraically, and align it with the archetypes of David to show how Yeshua lines up with each one of those pieces, just in a different format. Because things were different by the time when David was in sovereignty. When Yeshua was in sovereignty, the Jews cannot go and kill somebody. Matter of fact, when they killed Stephen, that was a punishable offense by law, because they didn't have the right to execute somebody the way they did. Stephen didn't even have a trial. Matter of fact, what was the charges against Stephen? They just didn't like what he was saying. You can't just pick up a stone and kill somebody. So they wasn't wrong for doing that. They broke the law, actually. Same way that they conspired to have Jesus killed. Peter had to come back and tell him, yo, you put an innocent man to death. So what's supposed to happen? All you're supposed to die. However, Torah says life for a life. Let me give you this last one. I think for people out there listening, life for a life. What does life for a life means? That means if you take a life, your life had to be taken. Mm-hmm. But if you take Yeshua's life, now you got to give your life for his. Now everything he was supposed to do, now you got to do. And through the baptism, that is you coming into covenant with Yeshua again. Now your life, Paul says, my life is not my own. Why? Because your life has to be given up. And then in exchange for that, you got to live the life that he wanted us to live. That's the only way you can get around that, because otherwise you got to die. But Peter, by means of Yeshua and the Spirit revealing to him what to tell these people, look, that's why when they heard all of this stuff, oh, we killed somebody the Most High sent innocently. What are we supposed to do? He said, all right, check it. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. Get baptized for the remission of sin, meaning that we're going to forgive this. We're going to pardon this if you go through this rite of passage. But now you have to give your life in place of his life. That's the only way they can be exonerated. And by proxy of that, everybody who rejects Yeshua is also complicit in his death. Therefore, this is why baptism is necessary and why you got to sacrifice your life and give it to him so he can live through you. That's how we lay it out. But anyway, there's a lot more we can keep talking, but I'm going to head home, right? Because I know my family's probably saying, where Dad at? But tomorrow, we're going to meet again around the same time. Have the same amount of time, because I'm going to eat before I get, so we have a little more time. And then anything else you want to get, you can get. And for the sake of the conversation, it was recorded. So if you ever want to go back over it, it'll be here on YouTube as well. And for anybody else who probably had questions about it, I know people ask me a lot. I thank this brother from coming all the way from where? Tell him where you're coming from.
Carson, California.
Carson, California. Flew out here with his own expense to sit down and chop it up with me. I'm honored, my brother.
Yes, sir. And
to answer questions that people probably also have themselves, but don't have the opportunity to ask. You've helped all these hundreds of people that's watching today. So I appreciate that. Okay. All right. So we're going to sign off. Let me give my salutations to the brother before we go. But thank y'all for watching. I'm here with the man, the myth, the legend. See him right there? Ex-NFL All-Star in the building. Good brother, down to earth, very humble man. Testimony is explosive, man. But some of the time, he'll probably get that to you on his own time. But thank you for watching. I appreciate this brother coming out here, showing his hospitality to me while he's here in Atlanta, when it's supposed to go the other way, right? But nonetheless, I'm going to keep building with him. By his permission, I'll share some of it with you so others can be edified. But thank you for watching and sitting through. I think we did 2.5 hours. A nice little build before we started. We had another build before this build, but we good. So thank y'all for watching. We're going to say peace and shalom.
Shalom.
All right, my brother.